Welcome to today's briefing. On October 7th, 2023, more than 1,000 Israelis were murdered by Hamas. They crossed from Gaza into Israel and perpetrated a massacre. The victims included elderly people and children. At least 260 of those murdered were young people attending a music festival. Many more victims were seriously wounded, and around 250 Israeli citizens were taken hostage and driven into Gaza. Israel's response was to declare war on Hamas, and what followed were 12 months of airstrikes and military operations by the IDF, which have left tens of thousands dead in Gaza. Thousands of others have been seriously wounded and left with life-changing injuries. And the victims there too include women, men and children of all ages. And there are now refugees in Gaza threatened with disease and hunger. And now the war we see has moved into Lebanon. Increased rocket attacks from Iranian-backed Hezbollah into northern Israel, which have killed civilians, have prompted Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon, including the capital Beirut. And there have also been civilian casualties there as well. And overnight, we've been told that the IDF has moved soldiers into Lebanon as well. Now, that I know is a very, very broad brushstroke of the situation in the Middle East. I just wanted to give us some context, some background to the discussions today. But we are not here to directly debate the rights and wrongs of what is happening in Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon. I'm just setting the scene. Our discussion today, and I want to be very clear about this, focuses on the effect all that I've just talked about has had on British citizens. And I'm talking about British Muslims and British Jews. What have the events in the Middle East done to community relations? How have they affected individuals and families? What about the rise in anti-Semitism? How have they affected Muslims and Islamophobia and the corresponding acts of violence on both communities? Both communities have experienced a rise in hate crime, physical attacks, and also online abuse. Now, we've got a number of invited guests that we hope to hear from today and that I'll call upon in just a moment. And also others, all of you who've joined this debate who may want to comment. Here's how it's going to work. I'm going to call upon people to speak, and others who want to speak and ask a question. Can I ask you to put your question into the chat so that we can see it? And if there's time, I will come to you and be prepared to speak on camera with your microphone open, of course. Once again, I'm not asking you for opinions on the events in the Middle East and who is to blame. I want to know that how these events are affecting ordinary citizens, ordinary British citizens and community relations here. Okay, so I want to come to Dave Rich first. I'm going to come to you first because I know you have to leave, Dave. And if I've got this right, you're the Director of Policy at the Community Security Trust, which provides security advice and training for Jewish organizations. So let me just start really. What are your general views from October the 7th through all that has happened until now?
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining today. It's been a very difficult year for the Jewish community. I think that's probably an understatement. It began on October 7th itself, when we saw this surge in anti-Jewish hate crime and anti-Semitic incidents being reported from across the country and across the community. And it really began on that day. You know, we are used to this dynamic where in previous years, when Israel is at war, we get spikes in anti-Semitism here in the UK in the reports of incidents that are coming into CST and the reports of hate crimes to the police. And we always differentiate in our statistics between anti-Semitic incidents that are targeting Jewish people or buildings or organizations simply because they're Jewish or are using anti-Semitic language on the one hand, and anti-Israel activism and commentary and language, which we separate out and don't include in our statistics. And so we're used to this dynamic in the past. But in the past, it normally takes time to get going. It builds up as conflicts in the Middle East escalates. It normally revolves around people seeing what's happening in Gaza, for example, and being very angry about it and sort of misguidedly directing that anger onto Jewish people in Britain. What happened on October 7th, of course, was very different because the pictures that were coming out of the Middle East were of an attack on Israel. The initial pictures were of casualties in Israel. And there were still some people here who saw that as a trigger to go out and shout abuse at Jewish people on the streets in Britain, to go and shout, to intimidate people outside synagogues, to do up graffiti on Jewish schools and in Jewish community areas, which is what we saw in those early days. And the days with the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents were in that initial week or two after October 7th. Now, the number of incidents being reported to CST is still 2 or 3 times what it was before October 7th. So even though it's come down from that initial peak when it was 6, 8 times what we would normally record, it's still not gone back down to whatever we might have considered normal. Not that we should ever accept any level of racism as normal. It's at this heightened level. Now, these are all the things we can see and count and measure. But there's also a lot going on beneath the surface that is affecting Jewish people across society. And one of the real changes over the last year is that we are receiving complaints about anti-Semitism, either explicit language or anti-Semitic treatment where Jewish people are feeling excluded from parts of society we hadn't really had it before, from workplaces, from hospitals, from schools. We're used to seeing anti-Semitism on the streets and online. We always get a bit in universities, but this was new. It's almost like it was spilling out everywhere. And it's had a really damaging impact, I think, on a lot of Jewish people who feel more afraid to reveal their Jewishness publicly. It's also contrastingly had the opposite impact on a lot of Jewish people who feel a sense of defiance. They want to show their Jewishness and express their Jewishness and really sort of, stand their ground in a way. But these all feed into or come from the same root, which is, I think over the last year, a lot of Jewish people in this country have had to think really deeply about what it means to be Jewish in Britain today in a way that maybe we didn't previously. And I think if I had to put my finger on one thing that's really changed for Jewish people, I think that's the thing that's changed it, is that it feels like the atmosphere has changed. And it's kind of forcing a conversation, an internal conversation, if you like, about what it means to be Jewish. And then people respond to that in different ways.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. And I will speak in a few minutes to Dr. Jonathan Boyd, who has this new report out. I won't come to you immediately, Jonathan, but about ambient anti-Semitism, which I'm very keen to learn more about. As you say, Dave, any form of anti-Semitism is unacceptable, but just how much is physical? Can we distinguish between physical attacks and this sense of just anti-Jewishness?
Sure. So in all the incidents we get reported to CST, we divide them up by category or by type. And in a normal year, only around 10%, 9-10% of the incidents reported to us are physical, involve some degree of violence. And thankfully, very few of those involve really extreme violence. In some ways, I think if we look at what's happened across the Jewish world over the last year, there are other countries and other communities where the level of violence directed at individuals and at property have been much worse, actually. And I don't want to tempt fate or appear complacent by saying that so far, we haven't really seen that to the same degree here. So in a normal year, around 10% involve violence. Actually, since 7th of October, as a proportion of the whole, that's dropped to around 6%. So the vast majority of what's being reported to us is verbal harassment and threats, or it's graffiti, or it's online. Now, there's always a tendency to treat these things as less important, less serious. But I think that misses the debilitating effects it has on a community. It can be quite damaging to get abuse shouted at you by some random stranger in the street just because of your identity. And of course, these stories spread throughout the community. So many people will either have experienced this themselves or will know of people who've experienced it.
Thank you so much. I know you have to go, but thank you so much for joining us. I should say that what I'm going to do, we've got several Jewish guests and we have several Muslim guests. And of course, we have all of the rest of you who may want to comment. I'm going to concentrate first on our Jewish guests and then I'll move on to our Muslim guests as well. So everybody will have a hearing in this debate today. Before I come to Jonathan Boyd, Dr. Jonathan Romain is the convener of the Rabbinical Court of Great Britain. And I think, Jonathan, you were recently retired from Maidenhead Synagogue. Thank you for joining us today. Just listening to what Dave was saying there, is that something that echoes with you? And particularly the sense of, maybe it's not about physical attack, but really it's this sense that your identity is being attacked, or you are facing anti-Semitic remarks, whatever it may be.
Yes, exactly right. And unfortunately, I can echo almost everything that Dave said. And the word I would have used is traumatized. Jews do feel traumatized, whether it was by the original viciousness of the attack, or the hostile reactions here, or the way anti-Israel sentiments morphed into anti-Semitism. But as well as that, there's also been two particular psychological effects. One is, as Dave sort of alluded, I think Jews now feel less secure, less at home in the UK, unsettled. They question whether they really belong here. I mean, by and large, I would say they very much do belong here. And we are okay, but we are perhaps feeling less okay than before. And I think one of the ways this has come out is in reports of loss of friendships with non-Jewish friends. Sometimes they've just literally had to be broken off because of an argument, or other times, and this is more common, Jews, and I had a lot of incidences reported to me of this, Jews feeling that they are editing their conversation with non-Jewish friends. In other words, whereas previously they might have talked quite easily about politics, foreign affairs, United States, what's going on in Ukraine, now they don't, because they are worried that it might lead into conversations about what's happening in Gaza and Israel, and lead to unacceptable remarks or hostile intimations that would then either be very uncomfortable or lead to friendships breaking off. And the other thing that perhaps is even worse is what's happening in schools. I say even worse because adults can take a lot of this, and perhaps some of us are used to low-lying anti-Semitism already. But when it hurts your children, that really digs in. And so a lot of children, and this is at general schools, not Jewish day schools, a lot of children at general schools have found that they've been name-called, asked what they were doing in Gaza, why they were bombing, had things such as swastikas daubed on their desk, being ostracized in the playground. And we haven't even mentioned, of course, interfaith relations, which have obviously been much harder as a result. I mean, it's great we're having a Jewish-Muslim dialogue right now, but either that's been put on ice in some communities, or they've gone ahead, but we've been a bit tiptoeing around the issues. I should say there are positives. And Jewish life is continuing apace in synagogues and cultural centres, and JW3 and Limud this year will be absolutely packed as normal. But we are feeling less at ease than before.
Can I just ask you briefly about the interfaith relations? So are you saying that's suffered? Are there any positive stories of where relations have still continued?
Yes, I mean, there are difficulties and it has suffered and things that haven't happened. On the other hand, there has been this sort of counter-reaction. And for instance, just after October 7th, I got together the local vicar, local imam, and the three of us said prayers in English, Arabic, and in Hebrew. It didn't change the world, but it was sent a message to our various congregations that we didn't want to import what was happening in the Middle East here. So, relationships have continued, but I think we've had to make an extra effort to make sure that they did do so.
Jonathan, thank you. Stay with us. Don't go away, because I'd like to hear from you again, if that's possible. And I've got another Jonathan I've already trailed ahead to, Dr. Jonathan Boyd, who's Executive Director of Jewish Policy Research, JPR. And you've got a report coming out, Jonathan, haven't you? And I've already said in trailing to your appearance that you've got this in the report, this very interesting, not a theory, but something that you're putting forward as ambient anti-Semitism. Do you want to explain that for us?
Yeah, I can try. And we've actually got two reports coming out. One is out today, and there's the second one coming out on Saturday night. The one on Saturday night actually looks empirically at British Jewish responses to everything that's happened over the course of the last year. So a lot of the themes, I think, that both Dave and Jonathan have mentioned, we've got, I think, sort of the first data really on exactly what's going on all of those sorts of measures. And, just before moving on to ambient anti-Semitism, the data are pretty clear. Jonathan's comment about Jews feeling less safe in Britain. About a quarter feel more or less the same as they did prior to October the 7th, but of the remaining 3/4, pretty well everyone says they're feeling less safe. There are similar sorts of numbers of people saying they feel less confident expressing their Jewishness or showing their Jewishness, displaying their Jewishness in public. There's data in there on friendships, and there's unquestionably a sort of a gravitational pull, if you like, towards Jewish friends and away from non-Jewish friends. A sense that those, like some of the conversations that are happening with non-Jewish friends, not universally, but certainly for a considerable proportion, have been difficult and uncomfortable. And the counterbalance to that is that Jews are sort of seeking the solidarity that comes from Jewish friends or Jewish community. And on the schools thing, a similar sort of thing is happening. Like, we can see that, of those Jews who send their children to non-Jewish schools, about 1 in 5 said that, given that choice again, post October the 7th, they probably would have veered towards sending their children to a Jewish school. So you're kind of seeing a sense of Jews feeling, I think, less comfortable in wider society and seeking out that sense of solidarity and comfort from within the community. So there are lots of indicators of that. In terms of ambient anti-Semitism, the first thing I would say is I'm not sure whether the term anti-Semitism in that phrase is correct or necessarily the term ambient is correct, but I'll tell you what I'm trying to get at. I think what a lot of Jews have experienced over the course of the last year, aside from a rise in anti-Semitic incidents that Dave spoke about, and a rise of kind of fears and anxieties generally, is a sort of an environmental change in society. So a lot of what's happened around various different realms, media coverage of the conflict, some of the demonstrations that have happened, some of the encampments on universities, little things like posters of hostages being defaced or torn down. I think, like, all of those things, in a sense, create a feeling that there's something going on in British society that feels uncomfortable, that feels very challenging to us. And as a minority, I think that has actually felt pretty comfortable in British society for a very long time. I think the data for many, many years have said actually Britain is one of the best places for Jews to live in the world. So for a minority that's felt pretty comfortable here, has managed to kind of balance their Jewishness with their integration into British society, I think, remarkably well. There's a sense that something is changing in British society that indicates that Jews are just not really fully understood, just don't quite fit in the same way as they did. And all of those things are, they're not necessarily anti-Semitic in and of themselves. Some of them are, some of them are not. But I think they create a kind of a cumulative atmosphere that just feels anything from uncomfortable to downright hostile.
Jonathan, thank you for the moment. Very interesting what you were saying about this sense of Jewish people wanting to kind of almost clan together. Maybe it's a feeling of protection, perhaps even if they have no religious views whatsoever, but wanting to feel with their fellow Jews maybe safer. Yeah. I will come back to you, so please stay with us. My final guest in terms of calling here that we asked to be here to talk about the Jewish point of view from how people are affected is Rabbi Warren Elf, who is co-chair of Faith Network for Manchester. And Warren, you signed or co-signed a letter from progressive Jewish leaders calling for peace and a two-state solution. What is your view on all of this? Not the events that are happening, but how it's affected British people and British Jews in particular.
Good morning and thank you. I don't think we can underestimate the level of impact that this has had on Jewish and Muslim and other communities in this country. I think that the tensions, the relationships have been incredibly strained, where you could normally talk about things and there's full respectful conversation with people of different faiths. I think it's had a massive impact. I know through my work with 3 synagogues that each synagogue, but also different members have responded and reacted differently and felt different pressures. Some have really been concerned and worried about the increased levels of anti-Semitism. Some have felt that, sort of Israel is sort of in danger. We have to do everything we can to support Israel. Can't even tolerate anti-Israel feelings within the synagogues. And it's just, so many things seem to have been disrupted in terms of the way that community, our own communal relationships, but also the intercommunal relationships are not shattered, but certainly have been sort of harmed by what's been going on. And I think everything that both Jonathan and Dave have said is perfectly accurate and correct in terms of the impact it's having on on Jews, on Jewish communities, schools. I remember there was one parent turning around and saying that her daughter had come back from school. It's a non-Jewish school, and sort of one of her, I think it was a Muslim friend, had turned around and said, "I can't be friends with you anymore." And sort of children, they don't understand this, but it's impacting them just as much as it's affecting their parents and other community members.
Well, briefly, talking about community relations, I'm guessing you had very good relationships with imams and mosques in your area. Has that continued?
Yes, I think the relationships I have are strong enough that they have continued. Although some of I think it's just our general busyness. We've not had as much contact. But I was amazed after the October the 7th attack how many imams and Christian ministers rang me up to check I was okay and express solidarity, and where so the conversations have arisen, where we've had contact. Those relationships are as strong as before. There were obviously questions about what was going on in terms of the violence and the atrocities in Gaza, and what reactions, interfaith groups' reactions to those would be, and trying to mediate the demand for statements from some of those groups and navigate that territory was incredibly difficult for a few months. But as you say, I have signed various petitions and letters and things to try and express the human concerns and shortness about what's been going on. And that is very real and present now. And I think it's important that we have to do what we can to support our own communities, but also to encourage the interfaith, the multicultural aspect of our society, because we are all living in Britain because we value this society. We feel at home. We feel that this is a safe space. We have to do everything we can to ensure that our co-religionists feel that, and we can develop those relationships positively again. And some of those conversations have taken time and will take more time to regenerate, but I'm convinced we can do it.
Okay, that's a helpful point to make. Thank you, Warren. Let me turn to the Muslim community now. As I said, I want to give equal voice to those two communities and how they've been affected by the events in the Middle East. I know we have Ibrahim Syed on the line, who is a coordinator at the Liverpool Region Mosque Network, and also, I think, Ibrahim, founder of the Wirral Deen Centre as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, from the Muslim community's point of view, I guess for you specifically in the Northwest, what has been your experience since October 7th?
It's always been a sensitive issue, hasn't it? The kind of conflict in Israel and Palestine. And, these sorts of things have been flaring up since I can remember, at different periods over the past decade, especially. But I think this time it really has shook the Muslim community. And people, because of, the kind of reporting through social media and the graphical representation of what's happening, I think people have really struggled to contain their emotions and how to respond. So I guess what comes from that is the responsibility from community leaders, sometimes understood and sometimes kind of assumed about how we should respond. And the kind of the nature of the response. And I think it's important to recognize that it is legitimate to feel so emotional and upset about what's happening, but also it's important for community leaders to demonstrate how to respond, and not kind of people rush in to say inappropriate things which are offensive towards our Jewish friends, and I guess separating the politics from the people, I think that's important. So we've had I could name lots of different examples where I've had to speak to kind of imams or friends or people in mosques about, actually, do we think that's an appropriate response to respond in that way? And I think it's nudging those responses to be appropriate. I think not illegitimizing people's right to protest and people's right to express political views. There's been one example in particular, myself, where after the October the 7th, myself and also a Jewish leader from the Syed Jewish Representative Council, coincidentally, we both reached out to a Christian minister, the rector of Liverpool, and we wanted to connect. So my relationship with, and I do know Warren, hi Warren, my relationship previously with Jewish leaders has been more on the surface, kind of seeing people at interfaith meetings and so on and so forth. And I wouldn't say they've been close friendships, but what we felt is that we wanted to see each other, and we wanted to kind of speak behind closed doors. And at that time, we were quite raw. We were kind of, unassuming about what to expect, but we met nevertheless. So this is a guy, so I'm kind of, early 40s. And the chap who I met, he's quite senior to me. He was, kind of late 60s, 70. Nevertheless, we met. And although that shouldn't be an issue, the age difference, but for me, it felt like, I was meeting someone of my father's stature. So my father would have been the same age as this gentleman. My father, sadly isn't with us anymore. So I guess, I did feel that sense of connection, with, I'll name him, with Max straight away. And when we met, we gave ourselves the opportunity to introduce ourselves, talk about our Muslimness and our Jewishness, or his Jewishness, and how we've arrived at where we are, the history of where our families have come from, and so on. But we also talked about the difficult things around what we feel about Israel, Palestine, and everything that's happened since 1948 and before and after and everything. But what we felt as though we connected as human beings, and actually we became friends as a consequence of that. So we agreed that we weren't ready for a photograph or to publicize this at this moment, because I think this could be a sensitive issue, and it could be perceived in our within our respective communities as insensitive and the wrong thing to do. Rubbing shoulders with, the other side, if you like. So we decided that we'd meet again. So we had another meeting. We decided that we would all bring one more person into the meeting. And the Christian minister also brought another person. So we then kind of developed it into a WhatsApp group called Liverpool Harmony Group. So we continue to meet. And there was something that was said at a mosque in my region, which was deemed to be inappropriate, and it made media headlines. Now, the response was, from my perspective, is we need to put this right. So we sat down for one of our another meetings, and I said, look, I made him aware of this, and I wasn't sure if he knew about it already, but I made him aware of it. And I said, look, how do we put this right? So we decided actually that we wanted to invite the Jewish leaders to attend the mosque. So we invited them, and we also invited leaders of other mosques from across the region, and it was well attended. The council leader attended, and police representatives attended, and so on. And in that meeting, what you could see is there was a kind of a lot of love that was shown. And some of the Muslim leaders actually said, there's a really grand synagogue in Liverpool. And they talked about, actually, that's our synagogue, and we will be there in person to protect synagogues. And I just felt as though, that's just one example of what was said, but we really solidified our kind of relationship. Since then, we've had more meetings, and again, it's working out. I invited friends to my house, and I've never invited Jewish friends to my house before, and I was trying to work out what would be kosher. So one of the conversations I had with Max was, what kind of snack could we provide that would be kosher? So we decided in the end on coconut samosas. Now, coconut samosas are a Bengali delicacy, and from what I now know is that it's kosher. 100%. So we enjoyed coconut samosas. We, continued the conversations. We've had a number of interfaith discussions. Now, sadly, during the time of the riots, over the summer, I was quite involved, coordinate with mosques and police and so on and so forth. But Max actually reached out to me and sent me a message, and I'm going to share it with you. He said, as follows, and there is a bit more to this story, but he said the following. On the 6th of August, he said, Ibrahim, just to let you know, my friend, that I am thinking of you, your wonderful family and community. These dark days will pass, and the friendships built with the goodness of our souls will endure. Love, Max. Now, I responded and said, it was really stressful at the time, but my response was, I'm so touched, Max. Love and best wishes. However, I'm a school teacher, so when I came back to school, one of the other people who were in the group was a deputy head from the Jewish school in Liverpool, who I actually visited as one of our Harmony group meetings. So she told me that Max had sadly been diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer. And so I wanted to visit Max. So I visited Max earlier last month. And when I visited Max and I sat down with him, he told me that actually he'd suddenly been diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer, and sadly, it's I think it's terminal. But one of the things that really touched me is that when he sent me that message, that was when he'd just been diagnosed. So he had all of these thoughts to contend with about, his personal struggles. But, from his heart, he needed to reach out to me. And what my other Jewish friend told me from that group was that, despite his health challenges, he was really upset by what was happening and what was being faced by the Muslim community. Now, that is obviously quite a touching story for me. But more broadly, It's been a very difficult time for the Muslim community, with over 40,000 death casualties. There's been demonstrations which have happened in Liverpool every week since October the 7th, and people have joined those, but Liverpool Friends of Palestine have held different events. But I guess it's a balancing act, trying to have a very measured response, and also feeling the pain of our brothers and sisters in Palestine, but also being mindful of all of our brothers and sisters in humanity, and particularly our Jewish friends.
Ibrahim, I'm going to stop you there, because what you've had to say was brilliant. Some of those examples, as you say, are really touching. We don't want to be naive and think that there isn't anger and there isn't pain and there hasn't been Islamophobic attacks or anti-Semitic attacks. But thank you for sharing those stories, which are incredibly positive. I'm sure it's been replicated across the country. And knowing Liverpool as I do, I think there's also a bit about being Scousers in there as well. Being together. But Ibrahim, for the moment, thank you. I'm conscious of time, but it's just really good to hear this personal testimony from both the Jewish community and the Muslim community. Let me speak to Sheila now from the Bristol Muslim Strategic Leadership Group. And I know, Sheila, you're engaged in a lot of community relations work with the City Council and also police liaison, that kind of thing. We've been in Liverpool. We're now in the west of the country in Bristol. What's been the experience there?
Mixed, I would say. To start with, after October 7th, a lot of synagogues and Muslim leaders reached out to the Jewish community in Bristol, and Avon and Somerset called together a meeting, 2 meetings in fact. The first meeting was with different communities I attended, and different parts of the Jewish community. That went relatively well. Obviously, feelings were raw on all sides. But they hadn't actually included any other Palestinian community on the first meeting, which was felt to be a mistake, quite frankly. Palestinian community in the Bristol area in South Gloucestershire is quite small. But so on the second meeting, they did include some. And it was very emotional, but actually it was a very positive meeting on all sides. It was unfortunate that one of the Jewish members didn't stay, but that happens. Emotions get too much for people sometimes. But generally through the year, it's been a devastating effect for the Muslim community, for all the Muslim communities, because not just because of the continuance of the violence, continues of the feelings, but how people have actually reacted, members of the public, particularly with social media. Social media has been absolutely bitter. And it has impacted on people in the schools, generally for Muslims, but also it's meant the Palestinian and the Arab communities felt even more sort of attacked mentally and emotionally. And generally speaking, I've just been at a meeting last week regarding the situation in Lebanon with the police again. And I'll sort of give you an example of what Mark Roncus, who was leading from the police, said. He said he was quite surprised that since the violence in Lebanon started, that his usual Islamophobic and anti-Semitism has been completely quiet, eerily quiet, he said. and he's quite worried about it. Now, going through the summer, he has been saying, and I'm quoting him, not anything for myself, that there has been very little, there has been anti-Semitism, but it's very low. There has every month, he says he has been getting figure work, which is...
Okay, Sheila, I'm just very conscious that we're speaking for ourselves and not necessarily quoting others in that respect,
Okay.
in terms of his opinion on anti-Semitism.
Okay.
I want to know how ordinary Muslims and ordinary Jews are feeling and affected by events in the Middle East.
Absolutely. And what I'm saying is that the relationship between the Jewish area and the ordinary Muslim area in my area have been quite positive and quite supportive on all counts. That means that ordinary Muslims still feel attacked, feel identified. And with, of course, going through the summer with the riots as well, that has even helped more. The people are being feeling sensitive and attacked, and their identity.
Sheila, thank you so much. I may come back to you. Can I just remind people as well that if you want to ask a question, please put your question into the post, and if we have time, I will come to you. Jonathan Romain, I'm going to come back to you in a moment because I know that you want to make a comment. But let me go to Ali Amla now. Ali, just remind me whereabouts you're from and what your comments are.
Good afternoon. My name's Ali. I'm the Youth and Partnerships Director at Solutions.Syed. I'm based up in Bradford, but I work across the country.
Okay. And how do your thoughts and how do you reflect what's been happening amongst the Muslim community where you are?
So I spend a lot of time across different communities, particularly within Muslim communities in the UK, in the north, as well as across London. There's a deep emotional, and I think many speakers have mentioned about the mental health impact. Many Muslim communities are feeling traumatized right now. Many Muslim communities are feeling deeply upset by what's happening geopolitically, what's happening in the region, but also what's happening in the UK currently as well. For many Muslims that I've spoken to, many are considering, is Britain still a safe home for us now? And many who may have never considered leaving Britain are now exploring, do we need to consider migrating as our forefathers migrated to the UK? So alongside that fear, there is also a natural and inevitable upset and anger. And what we have seen is a huge growth in Islamophobia. We've seen not only a growth of Islamophobia, but a normalization of Islamophobia and an acceptability of Islamophobia as well. For me, Baroness Varsi a few years ago mentioned that Islamophobia passed the dinner table test. Actually, the situation has become much worse now, where it has become an everyday occurrence. If I use the analogy of the iceberg, the hate crimes many Muslims experience as anti-Muslim hate crimes are only simply the tip of the iceberg. The experiences many Muslims are having with regards to Islamophobia in the workplace, Islamophobia in schools. My own daughter has experienced horrific incidents of Islamophobia and racism in her school, to the point where when I've approached the school, they've taken an approach in temporarily excluding the children who are the perpetrators. And I don't believe that strategy works. We need to really re-educate young people and create attitude changes rather than simply penalize. But when I've approached the school to do some follow-on work with them, they've been non-responsive, to say the least.
This is the school.
This is the school. And that's been really disheartening, because as a father, but also as a professional working in education, I really want to see institutional and structural changes in addressing these issues. And undoubtedly, as a father, I don't want my child to experience the racism I suffered growing up. But also, I must acknowledge many schools are approaching this subject in very different ways. My son's school, on the other hand, wrote to all parents acknowledging the riots during the summer and how to address and deal with these issues very robustly. However, my daughter's school didn't. So again, I think it's understanding different schools and taking different strategies. Talking from a solution, not sides perspective, particularly in our work in schools, what we are seeing is a huge shift in direction. Students are experiencing anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and we are also seeing a growth in anti-Palestinian narratives and in anti-Israeli narratives as well. And these really need to be acknowledged, addressed, but also need to create new strategies in how to address these as well.
Can I just ask you, it's very interesting, the very title of the organisation you work for, which is Solutions Not Sides. How does that work in practice then? I mean, are you active in trying to build community relations? How does it work so we understand better?
We have three arms of our work. Our youth education program is our largest arm of our work, where we bring Israeli and Palestinian peace builders from the region into schools to have a dialogue with young people. Last year, even though we was under immense pressure and challenge, we reached over 11,000 young people through our education program. And many young people have the opportunity to meet an Israeli and Palestinian peace builder, to listen to directly from them, but also to ask all of the questions they've always wanted to ask as well. What we do is we go a step further in looking at the everyday needs of Palestinian and Israelis in order to better understand what issues need to be resolved in order for peace to be a possibility. And then we create an opportunity for young people to explore what are viable options, be that a one-state solution, two-state solution, Confederacy model solutions. We don't go into schools telling young people or advocating for a specific solution. We want young people to think critically about what solution could be a possibility. In addition to our youth education program, we deliver training on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in relation to Israel-Palestine. Last year, we reached over 2,000 professionals across different sectors, not just in education, but in the media sector, arts and culture sector as well. And then our smallest arm of our work is our student leadership program. I lead on our Bridge Builders program, which brings together 20 young people from across the different faiths and none for a week at the Wolf Institute in Cambridge, exploring Israel-Palestine, but also exploring what does it really mean to foster good relations, to foster interfaith relations at a time when interfaith relations are so strained as well. And we are.
And then that's across communities, Anna, just to be absolutely clear, that's including Jews, it's including Christians, it may seem, and also Muslims as well.
So our cohort this year, and feel free to come onto our social media, we've got blogs slowly being introduced from our different participants. That includes Muslims, Christians, Jews, young people of all faiths and none. And it's a real dynamic space where we're really humanizing one another, but also not allowing Israel-Palestine to be the elephant in the interfaith room.
Okay, Ali, thank you so much. We're running slightly short of time, but I do want to kind of open it up a little bit now. And as I said to Ibrahim, we don't want to be naive. We know there's been rising Islamophobia, rises in anti-Semitism. We know that's happened. We know there's been pain, but we have heard quite a few positive things today as well. And Jonathan Romain, let me just come back to you because I know you wanted to say something in the light of what was being said by Ibrahim.
Yes, very much so. Firstly, sadly, as everyone I'm sure has noticed, Jewish and Muslim speakers have more or less mirrored each other. And if we didn't know which side we came from, then we wouldn't necessarily be aware. More importantly, after previous conflicts in the Middle East, and they happen every 10, 15 years, there's always been this spike in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And generally, once there was a ceasefire, the spikes have gone down and it's disappeared. My worry is that this time it may not happen, partly because the conflict has been longer and partly because the hardening of attitudes have been deeper. And what's been very apparent from speakers across the faiths is that both Jews and Muslims have been sort of circling the wagons, joining up to the synagogues, going, wanting Jewish day schools, whatever. And there's a real danger for both groups that we're going to become much more insular and inward looking. And that sense of dislocation that everyone's expressed so far, that will maintain maintain itself. So I think there's a lot of work for faith leaders to make sure that we can try and go back to October the 6th, if that's going to be possible.
I think it's interesting you say that, because that's something Jonathan Boyd, I think, was touching on as well, insofar as when bad things happen, the human nature is to understandably retreat into the safety of their community. And that's a natural human phenomenon. But I guess what you're saying is we need to reach out. We need to make more effort to establish those October 6th relations that perhaps we had.
Which was very good. We just to remind ourselves, it was very optimistic at that time, both of what was going on in the Middle East, but also back here. So we don't want to lose that sense of progress.
It's already 5-1, and I'm conscious we need to end very shortly. Jonathan, thank you. I think what I'd like to do is to just get 2 final comments, maybe from Ibrahim in Liverpool, and also Rabbi Warren, who we heard from before as well, just to kind of sum up how you feel now that we've had this discussion really on events and how they affect communities in Britain. Let's go to Ibrahim first. Let's hear your final thoughts.
The thing that's occurred to me is actually from the Jewish speakers is actually how vulnerable that they feel and their anxieties, because we often, when I say we, from the Muslim perspective, we're not cognizant of that, and we're not considering that, because we're just looking at, Palestinian children dying, and, Israel is the aggressor. And, I'm not going to state my political views here. However, I think what we need to understand is that we are part of a community here, which is multi-faith, multicultural, and it's important that we reassure each other and we maintain those bonds of trust and friendship, despite having difference of opinion.
Okay. And I don't want to trivialize anything, but I think your story of the coconut samosa, being a way of kind of bringing communities together is actually bizarrely quite a powerful symbol, isn't it, of meeting each other where we are. I don't know if we still have Warren. Warren, do you
can't get rid of me that easily. So
okay, Rabbi Warren.
After Ibrahim, I'm coming around for coconut samosas. So I think it'll be very easy to turn around and say the news is getting worse day by day, depending on perspectives, I suppose, and the numbers suffering, and that's impacting here, and it's going to continue to impact our communities here. And yes, it is. But I actually think there are lots of opportunities. We've heard several of the initiatives that have been done by just people on this call in the last 12 months. And I think we need to keep building on those, encouraging respectful conversations, and also challenging when people express anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or other racist and views of hatred. They need to be challenged. And it's sometimes difficult to see the right way forward, but it's sometimes the small steps and the one hand extended in friendship to another person that hopefully will lead to this. And thankfully, there are many of our organizations working here trying to find the right ways and work with other groups to challenge the hatreds and to establish better ways of dealing with each other and working together.
Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you also, Ibrahim, and thank you to everybody who's participated this afternoon. Not an easy subject to discuss, and we know there's been hate, there's been upset, there's even been violence on all sides, and we really regret that. But at the same time, I think we've heard some amazing stories today of how communities can work better together. So thank you all for your comments and for being part of this RMC debate today. Don't forget, you can always visit our website, religionmediacentre.org.uk. There is a daily email. I'm sure all of you are receiving daily email. Please visit our website. And thank you so much for your attention and your contributions today.